Find the derivative of g of x equals 2x quantity to the fourth minus the square root of 2x, then evaluate g prime of 2. G of x here is made up of two terms that are combined by subtraction. 2x quantity to the fourth minus the square root of 2x. We therefore can take the derivative of each of those terms separately and combine the results by subtraction. The first term, we'll be able to make use of the power rule once we have the x alone raised to the power. So we can separate this apart into 2 raised to the fourth power and x raised to the fourth power multiplying each other. Minus the second term, we can use the power rule once we separate the 2 and the x apart, so we have x raised to a power. They're each under a root, so the square root of 2 and the square root of x. In my next step, I'm going to raise 2 to the fourth. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 1 more 2 is 16, to give us 16x to the fourth for the first term, and then minus the square root of 2, which is just a constant, times x to the first power, and then square root. X to the first power, square root, 1 over 2 for its exponent, so we can use the power rule for the fractional exponent. Let's now take the derivative. G prime of x equals. The first term is a power rule. We'll bring down the 4, multiply with the 16, which is a 64, x to the 4 minus 1, which is 3. The next term, we will bring down the 1/2 times the negative root 2, and then x raised to the 1/2 minus 1, which I will call 2 over 2 for the common denominator. So we have 64 x cubed minus, that root 2 can be thought of as root 2 over 1 to multiply by the 1/2. Multiply the numerators. Root 2 times 1 is root 2. The denominators, 1 times 2 is 2. X raised to the 1 minus 2, negative 1 over the common denominator of 2, negative 1/2. G prime of x then is 64 x cubed minus, now the second term here, I'm going to take the negative exponent and move it to the other position. Right now it's in the numerator as x to the negative 1/2. It can move to the denominator down with the 2 and be x to the positive 1/2. Now I will take one more step and rewrite it, since the 1/2 power means the square root of x to the first power, or just the square root of x. There's our derivative g prime of x. Our next step is to evaluate g prime of 2. G prime of 2 means to plug a 2 in for each of the x's. 64 times 2 cubed minus the square root of 2 over 2 times the square root of 2. The square root of 2's can cancel in that fraction, leaving a 1 in the numerator. So we'll have 64 times 2 cubed. 2 times 2 is 4, times 1 more 2 is an 8. Minus 1 over 2. (64 times 8 is 512. Our next step is to get a common denominator between these terms. So I'm going to multiply that first one by 2 over 2. 512 times 2 over 2. We can think of it as 512 over 1 minus 1/2. 512 times a 2 is 1,024. It's now over 1 times 2, which is a 2. minus 1 over 2, so that we have a common denominator. 1024 minus 1 is 1023 over 2.